In this episode, we're going to fill you in on the 9 most common first home buyer questions that we hear. We've also collected some from mortgage brokers, real estate agents and conveyancers. You may have similar questions, but you don't know who to ask. Welcome to Your First Home Buyer Guide, the podcast for first home buyers who want to get it right.
I'm Megan and that was Veronica. We're both buyers agents and probably old enough to be your mums. But that's a good thing because between us, we've got over 40 years experience and we are going to share with you bucket loads of stories about avoidable mistakes. Together, we're going to make sure that you get unbiased and real information that you can rely on so you can get where you want to be without missing a step.
Now, we've got loads of great tips for you in this episode, and if you'd like more useful tools, head over to the website homebuyeracademy.com.au. There you'll find free checklists that you can download, a free mini course on how to price a property, and our Where to Buy workshop for only $39. Priceless stuff, really.
Bargain. But before we get into the interesting stuff in this week's episode, here's the boring bit, the disclaimer. You, of course, know that nothing in this podcast is to be taken as personal advice. We always recommend getting the advice of an expert in their field of expertise. Now, we've done our very best to ensure that the content is correct at the time of recording, but things change. So check with the relevant government authority or your advisors to get the most up-to-date information. Today, we're talking about the most common questions that first home buyers ask.
Now, before we get to that, however, Megan, last episode, you started sharing crazy houses on your background. And for those of you who are watching this rather than listening, you'll know what I'm talking about. If you're just listening, bear with us for a quick couple of seconds. Tell us about this one, Megan.
I love this. This is called flipping houses. For those who understand the strategy, the strategy in itself is to buy a house that needs a renovation, mainly a cosmetic renovation, and turn it over really quickly. So do the work, turn it over, make some money, move on to the next one. But I just love this house. It has actually been physically flipped on its head and built upside down. So fantastic. All right, let's get cracking, Veronica.
Don't buy that house, anybody.
Don't buy that house, but it's gorgeous. Can you imagine? I just can't even fathom being in that house. It just turns my brain upside down. Let's get cracking and see if we can answer some of your questions today.
All right. So
the big one.
Number one, most people when they do 9 most common, they start at number 9 and then they go,
we're going to hit the big one.
Start with number 1. The number 1 question that we get asked is, where should I buy?
And it's not only that we get asked it, Veronica, it's probably every first home buyer, when they talk to people at a barbecue or their boss or their parents or their friends that have purchased, it is the most asked questions. You know, where should I buy? What do you think about this area? Have you been here? It's such a common question. And I think one of the scariest things that we observe with first home buyers is how easily influenced they can be by people who have no idea actually what they're trying to achieve. So, you can ask that question. It's like me saying, where should I buy? And no one understanding where my children go to school, where my work is, where my social circles are, what sort of hobbies I have. Without that kind of information, then really you're asking someone where they think they should buy rather than where you should buy.
That's tricky. I think one of the big problems with where should I buy is that there's a sub-question to it that most people aren't articulating, and that is, where am I going to make the most amount of money? Where's going to grow the most in value? Where's the next hotspot? These are sort of the underlying unasked questions that really are encompassed in where should I buy. And unfortunately, there's a lot of articles out there, clickbait, and top 10 suburbs and all that sort of stuff. And all of these do reflect on what has happened, not necessarily what will happen. And it's very, very enticing. But the problem is the answer is a process. And like you say, you've got to take into account your individual requirements and goals and dreams and all that sort of stuff and finances. And then you have to actually go through a process of understanding what the possibilities are, which is why we came up with the Where to Buy workshop after all, because there's no simple answer to this question.
And it's not a one size fits all kind of solution. The process is very different for different people to go through because they have different priorities. And we talked about this in episode 11, if you remember back to that. So the Where to Buy tutorial and episode 11 are probably some really good places to start to fill yourself with some of the things that you need to ask of yourself before you start asking other people, where should I buy? And then reframe your question. So reframing your question is a really important one because you start asking people about what your needs are and what you're trying to achieve rather than just seeking their opinion on what they think and what they're trying to achieve or have, many people buy in an area and they don't know that they've bought in the wrong area until they go to sell. So realising the impact of a mistaken purchase doesn't actually happen sometimes for a very long period of time. So you've got to be careful who you ask.
Oh, yeah. And the next question, very commonly asked, is what should I buy, a house or an apartment? Now, we will have an episode dedicated to this coming up in a few weeks. So keep an ear out for that one. But just a couple of tips on this one, because it's very much location specific as well. I mean, if someone's looking at buying an apartment or a house in Brisbane, what would you say to them, Megan?
Well, it's too much of a closed question, Veronica, and I guess this is what we really want people to open their minds up to. I can't say whether you should buy an apartment in Brisbane, but what I would say is there is a large supply of 2-bed, 2-bath, 1-car accommodation apartments in Brisbane. So that means that you can probably pick one up pretty cheap. But if you looked at the what that might mean for you, are you just buying yourself somewhere to live for a period of time and you don't care about no capital growth or potentially some negative capital growth? Or are you looking at a 3-bedroom apartment or a townhouse? Are you wanting to be in a particular area and you can't afford a house, so the trade-off is an apartment? So there's so many answers to that single question of what should I buy that are so personal, but you need to know the bigger picture in the areas that you're looking at buying in. And if this is a stepping stone strategy, we talk about stepping stone strategy as a way to get from where you are now to your dream home in the long term. If you're looking at a stepping stone strategy and you want this first property to do the heavy lifting for you, to make some capital gains in a very short period of time, then certainly an apartment in Brisbane is not the way to do that. However, if you want a lifestyle in a certain location and, that's where you're going to be for 20 years, it might be a different discussion.
Now, we will put the link for the Stepping Stone Strategy tutorial in the show notes as well, because that's newly released if you're interested in looking at that. But, I think the thing is with houses and apartments, and as I said earlier, we will do an episode dedicated to this coming up, but there's a lot of misconceptions around apartments. One is that they don't go up in value. And so if you buy in an area where they're all the same and there's too many of them, you're damn right, they're not going to go up in value. Yeah. But if you buy in an area where they're more scarce and a type of apartment that's scarce, and particularly if you're looking at a 3-bedroom in a certain area versus
certain type, like an Art Deco or something that isn't easily reproduced. I guess that's a big part of what we'll be talking about in the upcoming episode is the uniqueness, the scarcity, the inability to reproduce something en masse, which is really where those problematic oversupply issues have come from.
Yeah. So I think a lot of people, a lot of first homers in particular, first homers, did I just say that? First home buyers? First homers? Just coined a new phrase.
Have you coined a new phrase? Oh, have you coined a new phrase?
Come with us, first homers. We'll get you there. A lot of first home buyers are lured to brand new apartments because, of course, let's face it, they're shiny and they're new.
Gorgeous. They feel fabulous.
No one's ever cooked in that kitchen.
Nothing to do.
Etc.
The toilet's clean.
That's it. They don't realize that it can be a trap. So we just, there's no simple answer. And this is the scary thing. I hate to tell you this, but here we are doing 9 most common first home buyer questions. The first 2 have said there's no simple answer.
Yes. And therein lies the complexity. We've got a trainee assistant buyer's agent who's been with us since about March, and he constantly looks at us in our buyer's agency business in Brisbane, looks at us and said, I had no idea how complex this stuff was. My friends have purchased properties. They had no idea in hindsight what they're actually doing. And I think that's the thing that we're just so dead keen on doing, is making sure that people have their eyes wide open, that they're alerted to the things that they don't know. You don't know what you don't know until somebody tells you, but it has to be independent and without any kind of ulterior motive. Sorry, it just got on my bandwagon a little bit there.
Yeah, you don't want to buy your first home relying on dumb luck. All right, third question.
How much can I afford? This is such a big question. And, people go to all sorts of different places to find the answer to this information. And the first place that a lot of people go to is online calculators. So they might go to, a bank's online calculator that it gives you an indication of what your borrowing capacity might be. And really that's borrowing capacity gives you an indication of how much you can afford. Veronica, we're not big fans of the online calculators because there's a lot of things missing there, isn't there?
Well, yeah, they're very much just a guide at best. And, if you tune into previous episodes, we're episode 7.
So it's 7 in the preparation phase.
All about borrowing strategy with David Johnson, and episode 28 all about the pre-approval process with Stuart Weems. Both experts, both mortgage brokers who explain things very, very well. They start to sort of shed a bit of light on the complexity. Once again, no simple answers. The complexity and the different levers that you can play with, that whether you use LMI or pay LMI or not, that's lender's mortgage
insurance.
Whether you borrow money from your family or not, whether you actually try to use every grant that's being given out by the governments and which ones are good ones to look at, which
schemes
ones
and all sorts of things that are available. There's so much there to look at that will influence how much you can afford.
That's it. And also, how is it, are you limiting what you can afford by what you think you should be able to afford versus what you actually can afford? And then are you looking at the property type in terms of what you are looking at buying and truly understanding what you need to be able to afford and then assessing it that way? So there's all these different ways to look at how to answer this question. And here we go.
And we want to give you that information. So go back to those previous episodes. And fill yourself with knowledge from people who are independent and actually have the right advice. Now, it's not personal advice. By no means are we suggesting that. We absolutely advocate for using a mortgage broker who will assess your personal situation. So the online calculator might give you a bit of a pie in the sky. Oh, maybe we could afford 700,000. But actually going to a mortgage broker and having them assess your individual situation, all those sorts of things, that is the place to go in your preparation phase to get the right information, but also to understand and get expert input into how you can improve your situation if you want to.
So this is actually the simplest one of all three questions so far, right?
Yeah, it is actually. There is an answer.
Yeah. Exactly where to go to get the answer. But just when you go to a mortgage broker, don't just go to any old mortgage broker. Go to one and test them out with that question. How can you explain borrowing strategy to me? And if they can't answer that or they waffle and you think, oh, I know, actually.
Well, they go straight to an interest rate. Yeah. I know who's got the best interest rate. Interest rate is one of the smallest part of the big picture when it comes to borrowing strategy, isn't it?
It is.
Right. But yet so many buyers actually focus on that question and that question line. So, good. All right, go back to those episodes, review.
Absolutely. Fourth question.
I found a place I like. What do I do now?
Well, hopefully you get finance approved.
and this comes down to process, doesn't it? I guess what we've done in pulling these questions together is you'll probably notice it does follow a little bit of the process, a little bit. And if you understand our course and you've looked at our course structure, our course is very much structured step by step, right from the very start, preparation, before you even open realestate.com or domain.com or start treating out in the street, looking at properties or speaking to agents. There is so much to do in the right order, and this is a big part of it. If you've done all your preparation work really well, then when you get to the point of actually finding a place that you like, you're probably well placed to know what to do next. And that's around the due diligence, how to research a property. And we've actually got an episode coming up shortly, 2 episodes coming up shortly. One is around due diligence and the other one is around the sorts of free data and information that you can use. And it's all very well and good to have this information, but we actually want you to know how to use it and how to apply it to individual properties so that you have a methodology when you find a property that you like, that you can pull it to pieces and put it back together again, and in relation to what your needs are and your goals.
So Megan's talking about the PACE system. So that's the system that underpins your first home buyer guide, the course, right? So PACE is P for preparation, A for action, C for commitment, and E for execution. And so these things have to happen in a certain order, as Megan was just saying. And, when we get up to, I found a place I like, what do I do now? That's the commitment phase. That's where we've got to basically go, right, well, what do I need to know in order to make sure that I'm not committing myself to buying a lemon or committing myself to a nightmare of horrors because there's all these things that I was unaware of. And so it's about peeling the scales off your eyes and the taking the rose-colored glasses off and thinking, are there reasons why I should not buy this property? What do I need to know? How do I need to arm myself? So very, very important. So but the whole point there about saying about PACE is that preparation and action comes before the commitment. So unfortunately, what a lot of people do, they get to action, all right, but they've done none of the preparation. So when they get to commitment, that's when there's this mad panic. What the hell do I do now? So
who do I talk to? And I don't even know what answers I'm looking for.
It's like, do it in the right order.
Get it in the right order. Get it in the right order. Let's get to the next one, because this is a big part of what do I do now? And that is, what should I pay?
Now, you're very fortunate because we have a free mini course for you. You will have the link in the show notes, and it's literally a free little 3 video course teaching you how to price a property and with a spreadsheet and the whole palaver. And we've also got an episode 27. Go back and listen to that. So there is, once again, it's a process. You don't sort of lick your finger and stick it in the air and hope
throw a dart at a dartboard. I don't know. Or worse, take your budget and decide that that's what you're going to pay for the property because that's how much you can afford.
Or just add 10% onto whatever the agent's saying is the price guide. So all of these are really bad methods for working out what you should pay. The other thing that you should not do, and that is, don't ask your mortgage broker what you should pay.
They haven't seen the property. They don't know what the comparables are. They might know what the comparables are, but they haven't seen the property and they're not experts in pricing properties. They are experts in sourcing funding for you to be able to purchase the property. So we talk about experts staying in their lanes. Big one is mortgage brokers should not be telling you what you should pay for a property. A valuer is the expert who will value the property on behalf of the bank, or a buyer's agent will give you guidance around pricing if you engage them to help you with that part of the process. And just remember, we've talked about buyer's agents before and what their role can be. It can be everything from the whole process for you or just little bits of the process, and helping you price a property is absolutely one of those things that a buyer's agent can help you with.
Now, with a mortgage broker, a lot of the ones that we talk to, they do say that a lot to buyers, not just first home buyers, by the way, a lot of buyers of all descriptions, ask them what they should pay for a property. And a lot of the reasons why that is, I think, is because people don't know where to turn to get this information. And unless you are going to pay an expert, then you do need to learn how to do it yourself, because the broker can't. And the worst thing a broker will do is, when they're trying to be helpful, is press a button and give you an AVM, an automated valuation model is what it's called. And that's where the computer spits out a price range. The worst thing, do not rely on that. And if you do get given one, get a big black texter, cross out the price out. And just turn over to the comparable sales and make your own mind up as to whether they are in fact comparable or not.
And that's a big part of the free course, isn't it, Veronica? We talk about and we pull AVMs to pieces. Just an example, we did an AVM on a particular property in the free course, in the mini course, and there was a $299,000 range between the lowest price in the range and the highest price in the range. Now, you and I have been doing this for decades, and that is not helpful information.
No, I think anyone's probably heard me go on about that ANZ ad, when the sanctimonious buyer holds the iPad in front of the real estate agent, says, I'm all right, thanks, because I've got the ANZ AVM. And then you look at it, you zoom in, and it's got something like 680,000 or 920 or something on the range. Like, how did that help? That helps nobody.
How is that helpful? You're either going to underpay or overpay. It gives you you need a much narrower range when you're putting a price on a property. Okay, so let's move on to question 6 in our top 9 questions. What deposit do I have to pay?
This depends on where you're buying.
And it depends what you mean by deposit.
So, okay, there's 2 types of deposit. There's the holding deposit, which if you're in New South Wales holds nothing and is useless. It's almost like a letter of intent. And then there's the actual deposit that you hand over in order to secure the property. And that's part of a process that you need to go through. And
it's different state by state, as you pointed out.
Typically in New South Wales, it's 10%, but it's not unusual to be negotiated down to 5%. And in other states, there's no such amount, no set amount.
And in some states, you don't need any consideration to form a contract, and in other states, there's a certain amount. I think South Australia's $100, or anyway. We do have more information on that in the course. But this is really important to understand, because this is the money. This is not the deposit that you're contributing in addition to the funds that the bank is going to loan you. This is the deposit that is part of the negotiation and the formation of the contract, or securing the property under your control contractually. So it's really important to understand that in a really strong seller's market, you need to have a pretty decent deposit to show that you're pretty serious. So in a buyer's market where there's not a lot of competition and sellers are really keen for people to put any kind of offers forward, we can secure a contract for $1,000. But there's no chance in the world that we would be able to do that in Brisbane in a seller's market where other people might be offering 3-5% maybe to secure the property. Auctions are different. So that's an amount that you put forward as an offer of consideration to form the contract. In an auction situation, it is the seller who will determine, or the agent under the seller's instruction, who will determine what the deposit is. And you need to make sure that you have those funds available should you be the buyer on the day. At the fall of the hammer, it is usually a requirement that you either pay on the day or within a certain amount of time. And you need to ask the agent what that amount is. Most often it's 10%. Sometimes it'll be dropped to 5%. But if you're working out how much you're going to pay for a property, you need to factor in that you will need to transfer that money. If you do it electronically or a bank check, deposit guarantees are a little less common these days, but you need to have access to that money if you purchase that property on auction day.
And it's such an interesting point, because a lot of people think, I've saved up a 20% deposit, then I have to pay a 20% deposit to the owner or to the agent when you actually execute that contract, and you don't. It's actually different. They're the same word, 2 very, very different meanings. So what you have to save up in order to have the bank give you the balance is one form of deposit. The other form of deposit is literally what you hand over in order to secure the property. And then on settlement, that's when you have to make up the difference, so the bank will still only give you however much that they've decided they're going to give you. And then if you have more money you need to tip in, so that's where your balance of your 20%, if that's what you've saved up, that's when you actually hand that over to the vendor on settlement, not actually at the beginning of the process.
Good. Excellent advice, Veronica.
Question 7.
Do I really have to use a solicitor or a conveyancer?
This has got a really easy answer. Yes.
Yes.
Now, but it's not just, is it?
Yes. Yeah. And don't go cheap on this one. Don't go for the cheapest quote that you possibly can. And we had a great discussion with Jenny Toner, who's a conveyancer in New South Wales. That was episode 23. So have a look back at that one on some of the things that can really go wrong if you don't have the solicitor involved at the right point in the contract. In Queensland, it's a really different point that you involve the solicitor. In New South Wales, the contract is created by the the seller's solicitor, isn't it, Veronica? So
yes.
In actual fact, that involvement is very early, and the agent has to provide that contract to the purchaser for their solicitor, take it up here, for their solicitor to review prior to any sort of exchange?
Yep. And I love how you sort of almost you say it like a question, Megan, because it's every state is so different, you know, and when I talk about Queensland, I'm scratching my head because it's not like that. It's nothing like that. Yeah. But the fact is that you need a conveyancer or solicitor to be involved early as possible, as soon as you have decided you really want to go for a property, because it doesn't matter whether there's a state like New South Wales or like Victoria even where the vendor has to disclose certain things, or in Queensland where the vendor doesn't disclose much at all. The solicitor or conveyancer needs to know where the gaps are, what else you need to know before you commit yourself to it, and if there are any conditions that you can put forward, what you need to be asking for. Because if you go in and you can make an offer without, you can sign a contract without actually consulting with a solicitor first, even in New South Wales, not unconditionally. I mean, you will get a cooling off period, but you risk a portion of that money, of the amount that you've offered, you risk 0.25% of that if you back out. And you might need to back out if you haven't had that contract reviewed first. Because there might be things there that are really unfavourable to you that you can't then renegotiate. So it absolutely, the answer is yes. You do need to use a conveyancer or solicitor.
That's straightforward. That is the most straightforward question that we can answer.
You need one that's experienced, not cut price, and you need to get them involved early once you've found a property.
Absolutely agree. Let's move on to question 8. Do I really need to have a building and pest inspection?
Yes.
Yes. Now, sometimes the seller may have done one in the lead up to an auction or in the pre-sale process. So it may be available through the agent, or you may have to engage someone yourself to get one done. They're two different approaches to make, because if a seller has got an inspector doing an inspection on their behalf, it's not necessarily a pre-purchase inspection, it's a pre-sale inspection. So it may not be as in-depth as you might want as a purchaser.
Now, I'm just we did interview one of my old favourite building and pest inspectors, and I'm just quickly looking up the episode.
It's on the run sheet, Veronica. It's episode 9.
It's not. It's the wrong one.
Oh, is it the wrong one?
That's the wrong one. And I'm
Apologies.
like, that's the wrong one. Oh, here we go.
Apologise.
Questions you must ask your building inspector with Peter Mazier is episode 14.
14.
So that's fantastic episode to go back to. Peter, it was, I learned a lot from Peter, used to be the building inspector we used to use. So the thing about building inspections and whether or not you use the one that the agent has done is that you've got to sort of understand that, okay, there's obviously a time saving and probably a cost saving in using the agent's one, but there's also probably a slight conflict of interest. Now, we sometimes use them, and that is because we have dealt with so many agents and properties around the years that, and what do you call them, building inspectors, that we know who's good building inspector, who's a bad building inspector. So there's one guy, for instance, that the minute I see his name on there, I just say to the guy, to our team, I'm sorry, we've got to get our own independent one.
Yeah.
I saw this guy at an open house once, the first time I ever came across him, pulling at a fibro sheet on a very old house and tugging at the thing. And I went, mate, what if that's asbestos? And he's like, it's not that important. And I went, okay, can you just, before you do any more, I want to leave.
Just rewind.
I want to actually get away from you, because if one of those little fibres lodges itself in my lungs, I could get asbestosis or anyway, beside all that, it was just so ignorant. Now, then I read a couple of his reports, and they were on properties that I've been through myself. I could have written a more comprehensive report on my inspection, and they were alarmingly positive. So I know that, guys, reports are worth nothing. So the minute I see his name, we will get our own independent one. And other times when another guy who we do rate quite well, and I'll pick up the phone and I'll have a quick chat to him. Now, that's a benefit I've got as a buyer's agent.
Because you're dealing with so many, so often you're seeing who's good, you're seeing who's bad, but you've also got formed a respectful relationship. with some.
Exactly. So, but the thing is also that I do know by looking at a property, because I look at so many different types of ages, and this is where you need to go back and listen to episode 14, different types of properties at different ages will have different typical faults. And so when I go through and look at those things, I know what to expect to see in the building inspection report. And if I don't see reference to them, I'm alarmed and I want to get my own report. So it's just something to be very aware of, that there are so many things that can go wrong in a building. And when you're buying a house, everything costs a lot of money to fix. So it's worthwhile spending a few $100 to get a building pest inspection.
I think the other thing that we do touch on in that episode is that if you do rely on the inspection report that has been supplied by the vendor, then you need to make sure that can actually, you can actually sort of purchase that warranty, if you like. So the report is only done for the person who engages the inspector. In order for you to have that warranty from the inspection, you need to make sure that inspection can be transferred to you if you're the successful purchaser. So certainly go back to that episode and review that, because that's really important if you decide not to engage your own building and pest inspector.
Such a good point. In fact, that has actually been something that I've noticed change. There's one mob called Before You Bid and Ion. There's a few of these organisations that actually they're effectively an aggregator for building pest inspectors, right? So the agent, I don't know if it doesn't look like it's the case up in Brizzy, but in Sydney, agent will book it through one of these companies. They'll farm it out to any number of inspectors, and you might buy a report for, it could be $29, $49, $69, and then there'll be a clause there to say, if you're the successful purchaser, you need to top that up with another $300 or whatever it is the top-up fee in order to get that report in your name if you are the successful purchaser. So there's lots of different terms depending on who actually does the report, and that's well worth reading up on that too, because you might buy one of these cheap ones and not realise that if you become the purchaser, it's automatic. You'll get billed. And in a way, it's a good thing, because that means that it's in your name and you can rely on that if there's something missing in the future. But seriously, do you really want to rely on it? You really want to buy a building where you understand, what you
can talk to the inspector. It's so important to talk to them. One of the big questions that we always ask if there's a few issues in a property and it's sort of on the fence, we'll say to the inspector, would you let your daughter buy this property?
Yes.
And it's such a powerful question because, well, let's be honest, most inspectors are male. And the answer to that question can sometimes be really quite telling.
Absolutely. It's a great question to ask.
All right, on to your favourite, Veronica.
I hate auctions and I don't want to buy a property that way. It's not really a question.
I hear this so many times from even our own clients. So our buyer's agency clients will say to me, Megan, I don't care how good the property is, I'm not buying at auction. And I'll say, well, I don't care what you think. It's just another way to buy. And if it's the right property, I'll be buying it at auction, not you. So don't worry about it.
Yeah, it's a fear. It is fearful. It's scary. I mean, auctions are really sort of, they're very daunting. And the amount of times that I come across people, the first time they've ever been to an auction, they're actually bidding at it for themselves. It's like, oh my God, what?
They've never seen it before. I was sitting in an in-rooms auction a few weeks ago, and there was a lovely little first home that was there. There was an investor and two first home buyers that were bidding against each other. So it wasn't an overly active auction, but this poor couple that was sitting down the front, they were so nervous, and you could hear the shaking in his voice, and she was clutching his arm, and anyway, the investor sort of fell off, and there was two first home buyers left, and this poor bloke bid against himself in the auction room, and the auctioneer, very experienced auctioneer, looked at him and said, look, mate, you don't actually have to bid against yourself if you're holding the bid. And he didn't know what that meant. And I just felt so deeply in my heart that had that couple gone to a few auctions and got a bit comfortable with it, understood the process, read the book. I mean, you've written the book on auctions. Had they done these things, and they would have been in a so much more powerful position to feel confident, but also to be in control of the process. So whilst did you actually get that to show?
I was just sorry. I was just.
You've got to get the angle, haven't you?
I know. We've got this sorry. Once again, this is a visual joke for those of you watching the video, but I've been quietly, sneakily putting the book cover up in front of me on the video. But of course, I've got this weird green screen behind me, so it keeps sort of disappearing. It's very odd. Anyway, sorry for those.
That's a visual one for those who are just listening. But yeah. I think it's really it's there are so many more properties and an increasing number of properties going to auction, and particularly in a seller's market where there are multiple buyers competing for very limited stock. It's more common for properties to go to auction and to make it all the way through to auction, not actually sell before auction. So it's so important that you don't discount or eliminate properties just because they are being sold by a particular method. So method of sale is what we talk about in the 10-step PACE system.
Your first home buyer guide, folks.
Your first home buyer guide. The method of sale is most commonly either private treaty, where a property is advertised with a price, or for sale, or by negotiation, or words similar to that, or by public auction, which is essentially gathering bidders together and putting them in competition with each other. Now, I, as a professional, would much rather stand up at an auction on behalf of my clients and see what every other bidder is doing, and have the ability to just sneak over the top of an underbidder to purchase the property, than to have a closed door, almost auction, put your best offer forward, have no idea what anyone else is paying, and be quite blind in the process. So for me as a professional, I find auction to be a very good way to see what other buyers are doing, and not to feel like I'm backed into a corner with no control.
It's transparent. That is one of the benefits to buyers, and that's one of the things that often buyers don't realise, that how opaque and nasty offers behind closed doors can be.
Yeah, multiple offers are hard going, you just don't know.
So when buyers say, look, I hate auctions and I want to make a pre-auction offer, how can I do that? Which is sort of like the sub-question to this question. What I'd like to counsel you to do is be very aware of what also can go wrong, and then you won't even know whether to believe the agent or not when they're telling you about other offers. So to go back and listen to episode 24, we go into auctions, a whole episode about auctions, so you don't have to get too scared and demystify and all that sort of stuff. And you can also buy the book if you want to. And that's our top 9 questions. That's our top 9 questions that first home buyers most commonly ask. Glad you could join us for the episode. In this episode, we've covered a very small part of our 10-step online course for first home buyers. If you would like to learn more about the process and how to buy without making a mistake, then head over to our website, www.homebuyeracademy.com.au. Don't forget to subscribe to the podcast so you won't miss an episode. And if you like what you've heard today, please give us an iTunes review. 5 stars would be wonderful. It will help others find us as well. Thank you for joining us. We hope you found this really useful. And if you have, please share the love with others who you know are in the same boat. We'll be back next week with some more priceless stuff.